there any newcomers? How many of you were not present last time? This series of talks is actually one built on the other, so that you'll be able to follow this well if you have been following the previous talks. Anyway, you will be able to get at least something out of it. We discussed last time that we were talking about Nirvana or Nibbana in Pali. Nirvana in Sanskrit. This is the goal of the Buddhist, the ultimate goal. Today we are going to talk about how to attain to that state. We were speaking about samsara. Samsara is that continuous cycle of birth and death that goes on. And people don't like to die. It is seen as a state of perpetual death. And where we are reborn depends on the kind of life we live. There we are mainly referring to the emotional part of our lives. If we live with bad emotions, like anger, greed, passion, lust, fears, worries, anxieties, that can lead us to a bad rebirth. If we live a life with good emotions, in the sense that our mind is calm, tranquil, patient, tolerant, kind, compassionate, that kind of life will lead to a good rebirth. That is the meaning of karma. Karma simply means the emotional state. So it's that emotional state that is important. It's the mood, the temper. We discussed this last time, but we also said that our mood and temper depends on our views about life, our philosophy of life, how we think about life. So in order to change our mind, to get the mind to a calm state, we have to change our thinking, our beliefs. If our beliefs are all self-centered, we become very emotional. Our beliefs should be unselfish, selfless. we should be thinking not in terms of I, we should be thinking in terms of we. We are. That means all. So it is a kind of expansion of consciousness. When we are mainly thinking about ourselves, or just our family, or our nation, or just our race, or something like that, then we are narrow-minded. We have to have a broad mind. Our interest should be all beings, not even just human beings, even animals. All beings, even plant life. So if we begin to have a broad view about life, then it is possible gradually to get rid of these emotions. The way out of samsara is what all Indian thinkers were trying to get at. So the point is not merely that we are living more than one life, it is also an awareness that this continuity of life is not a good thing. So we have to stop this process of rebirth, but we cannot do it till we have got rid of the notion of a self that exists in the world. All self-centered thinking, all selfishness is based on the notion of self. So it's only by realizing that the self or the existence of the self is a delusion. It's not only an illusion, it is a delusion. An illusion is a perceptual fallacy, like a mirage. That is an illusion. A delusion is a conceptual fallacy. So it is only when we have been able to free ourselves of this delusion that we can be free from all this birth, old age, disease and death. All religions are seeking this, not only Buddhism. All religions are looking for eternal happiness and eternal life. This is because they don't like to die. They don't like to be unhappy. But what the Buddha pointed out was that if we go after eternal life, we can't be free of this, because eternal life is an illusion. The reality is that everything is impermanent. life and death are not opposites. They are two sides of the same thing. We are born, then we grow old, then we fall sick and die. That is life. So life is a change. It's not a static thing. It's a process of change, like a wave. It has a beginning and it has an end. The beginning is called birth, the end is called death. And in between is change, the aging process. So death is a part of life. It's not the opposite of life. Now the first thing that we have to understand when we begin to talk about the way out of samsara is our view about life. It's in Pali called Samadhi, and that is, I translate as the harmonious perspective. It's a harmonious perspective because it's a perspective that brings about harmony. Harmony is the opposite of conflict. And the conflict is that our emotions are in conflict with our reason. When we talk about the mind, there are two parts of the mind. What we normally call the head and the heart. The head refers to the thinking part, the reasoning part, and the heart refers to the emotional part. Now these emotions are blind, as Sigmund Freud saw it. Emotions are blind and they are also self-centered, always trying to survive and satisfy oneself. The emotions are all self-centered. And it is blind. It is the thinking part, the reasoning part, that is aware of the reality around. The reality is impermanence. Now the emotions means the basic emotions is the desire for pleasure and the hatred of pain. So if we desire pleasure and hate pain, what we really need is to have pleasure all the time and to be free of pain all the time. That means eternal pleasure. So the goal of the emotions will be eternal pleasure. But reality, our reasoning part of the mind tells us that everything is impermanent. Pleasure and pain are impermanent things. But our emotions want permanent pleasure. So this is the conflict. Conflict between emotion and reason. This Freud also saw. The emotional part he called id. The reasoning part he called the ego. He called the reasoning part the ego because he was influenced by Descartes, who said, I think, therefore I am. So, because he identified the thinking part as the self. But this doesn't mean that he really believed in a self, because he saw the whole personality as a mechanical process. So he saw a part of it. But the important thing is, how can we resolve this conflict? This is what the Buddha pointed out. So this is why this harmonious perspective is called the harmonious perspective, because it is the perspective that resolves the conflict. Which is really to understand the problem and its solution. The problem the Buddha called dukkha. Usually translated as suffering. It is a suffering because this conflict between the emotion and reason is causing a lot of suffering. If you read the psychology of Freud or the psychology of all other psychotherapists, and you'll see that they are all trying to solve this problem. All neurosis, psychosis, all the mental sicknesses, worries, anxieties, all that comes from this problem. So it is very important to understand this problem properly and to understand how it could be solved. The problem is mainly this conflict. This is why, if you have read about the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha spoke of, you will find that he's talking about birth, old age, disease and death. Birth, old age, disease and death is the nature of life. It is not necessary to take these four things, birth, old age, disease and death, as separate things. They are not separate things. They are all one process of change. You start with birth, then you begin to grow old, then you fall sick and die. In other words, life is impermanent. It's a process of change. You part from the pleasant and meet the unpleasant. The pleasant thing is to be young, youthful. The unpleasant thing is to start growing old. It is pleasant to be healthy. It is unpleasant to be sick. It is pleasant to be alive. It is unpleasant to die. So we have to part from the pleasant and meet the unpleasant. And then he speaks about the inability to satisfy our desire. What is our desire? The desire is to be young all the time, to be healthy all the time, and to be alive all the time. Eternal youth, eternal health, and eternal life. That's our desire. But that desire cannot be satisfied. So, that is the suffering. And then Buddha points out the cause of this suffering. The cause is our emotion, usually translated as craving. It's not just craving, it's simply the emotional urge. Which is blind. This emotional urge, which is not aware of reality, is this desire for pleasure, which is permanent pleasure, and the desire for existence, which is the desire to be alive all the time. And there is also, when everything fails, there is also a desire to die and die forever. That's also a desire. That is what you might call a suicidal wish, which Freud also saw. He called it the death wish. When everything fails, people want to commit suicide. So all these desires are really creating unhappiness. Even if we commit suicide, the problem is not solved. That's the way. The problem can be solved only by getting rid of this blind emotion. This is what the Buddha pointed out. This blind emotion has to be rooted out. This is where Freud made the mistake. He thought the emotions are instincts. Instincts means we are born with it and nothing can be done about it. We cannot remove. He thought we can never remove these emotions. In thinking of emotions, he thought the emotions arise from inside and it goes out. It is expressed in the form of behavior, actions. That's how he saw it. But the Buddha pointed out that the emotions are not born inside. It comes from outside. It comes from outside and goes in. This is the important thing that the Buddha pointed out. And he used a word for it, which means, it's called, the word is asrava. Asrava. The root is sru, srav. Srava means flow, to flow. Asrava is to flow in. So some translate this as the influx, or some have translated it as cankers. They have not got the meaning properly. I translate this as influence, because the word influence means flowing in. What this means is, all desires begin as a reaction to sensory stimulation. When we see something, that is a reaction to sensory stimulation. Light falls on the eye, and the eye is stimulated. You know, the modern scientific or biological theory, the modern way of seeing this is that we have a thing called a retina behind the eyeball, and there are nerve endings there coming from the optic nerve. And when we say light comes into the eye, that means light is an electromagnetic wave with a certain frequency. And there are 7 frequencies that are able to stimulate the eye. And each frequency produces the vision of a color. So we have 7 colors: violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, which we call the rainbow colors. So when the electromagnetic wave falls onto the eye, we see colors. So the seeing of colors is a reaction to the stimulus. And then there is the process of perception, which is we make use of the colors to form objects. So when we see objects, we are not really seeing an object, it's only an image that we see, like a photograph. And that is also part of the reaction. And once we see some object, then we begin to interpret that in a certain way. We can see it as something pleasant, or we can see it as something unpleasant, or we can see it as something dangerous. According to how we interpret that, the emotion is aroused. The emotional arousal is simply another message going through the nerves to the glands. The message can go to the adrenal gland if there is something unpleasant or dangerous, or the message can go to the sexual glands. Whatever the message, according to that, the emotion is aroused. It can come in the form of anger, or it can come in the form of fear, or it can come in the form of a sexual desire. Whatever the emotion, it is all started from the stimulation of the senses. So it's coming from outside in. And once the emotion has been aroused, the body changes, the blood changes. When these hormones go to various parts of the body, those various parts of the body begin to either become overactive or underactive. Some parts become overactive, some parts become underactive. The body begins to get ready to act. All the big muscles become tensed. And this tension produces discomfort. And then we want to get rid of this discomfort by releasing the tension in action. The action can be to obtain what we desire, or to get rid of what we hate, or to run away from what we fear. Or if we are unable to do it, we might cry and lament. That's also a way of releasing the tension. So all our behavior is simply a release of tension. So that whole process started from outside and came inside, and then it was expressed in action. That whole reaction is what is called karma. Karma is not some mysterious force that is coming from outside. It is this reaction of the organism which is karma. It's not some kind of fatalistic law. It is simply that this reaction has consequences. If we are angry and we act in an angry way, it will hurt not only ourselves, it hurts other people also. And if other people are hurt, what do? They also react. And they will begin to hurt us. And therefore, that would be the consequence. All our selfish behavior can have bad consequences. In the same way, unselfish behavior can have good consequences. That's the meaning of karma. But this goes on to the next life also. If we die with an emotional state, if we die with anger, or if we die with greed or passion, that will go out in the form of electromagnetic waves again. And that is how it will cause a rebirth. Now today, all brain activity is seen as electrical. It can be recorded. With the electrical encephalogram, what is called EEG. So it works like the radio waves. That's how it happens. That's how this karma can affect the next life also. Even where we are born. So the important thing is to understand that we are not being controlled by instincts. We are being controlled by influences. These emotions start from outside. And therefore, it is possible to prevent the emotions coming up. This is what the Buddha discovered. There is a way out of this emotion. The way out of the emotion is, it begins with guarding the senses. We have to learn to guard the senses, because it begins at the senses. This is what is called Indriya Samvara. Indriya means the senses, Samvara means guarding the senses. Indriya guarding the senses. That means when we look at an object, there are three conditions necessary to start the process. One is our eye must be open. The second is there must be something to be seen from outside. And the third is to be thinking about what is seen. We cannot avoid opening the eyes. We cannot avoid seeing objects. But this third one is something that we can avoid, which is thinking about the object. Thinking about the object means thinking how pleasant it is, or thinking how unpleasant it is. If we think it is very pleasant, a desire arises. If we think it is unpleasant, a hatred arises. So, if we can, when we see an object, if we stop thinking about and focus our attention within, instead of focusing our attention on the object, we focus our attention on our reaction to the object. If we focus our attention on the reaction to the object, that reaction stops. Because for the reaction to occur, we have to be thinking about the object. Now, bringing the attention inwards instead of outwards is what is called sati. What is usually translated as mindfulness. I don't call it mindfulness. It is not mindfulness. It is, I call it introversion of attention. The attention is introverted, not looking at the object, but looking at the reaction to the object. That is the meaning of satipatthana. Satipatthana, the word satipatthana is really a combination of two parts, sati and upatthana. Sati is attention, upatthana is turning inwards. Focusing the attention inwards. Introversion of attention. And once we have been able to do that, the next step is to examine the reaction, to become aware of the reaction fully. So when we become aware of the reaction fully, we become aware of 4 parts of the reaction. The physical part of the reaction, which is seen as awareness of the body. Which is called Kaya-anupassana, awareness of the body. Then you focus on the sensation, which is pleasant or unpleasant, or neutral. It's called Vedana-anupassana, which is becoming aware of the reaction in the form of a sensation, which can be just the awareness of tension in the body, which is felt as a discomfort. Now when we become aware of the sensation, the next is to become aware of the emotional arousal, which is called the Chitta-anupassana. Here the emotional arousal may be just very subtle. When the emotion is aroused in a very gross way, you might be aware of it in the form of anger or lust or whatever. But when it is in a subtle form, you are not even aware of it. And so, at this point, you begin to become aware of it. You become aware of the emotion. Then the next is to become aware of the concept, the thinking part, which produce the emotional excitement. You form the concept. You become aware of the concept that you have formed, your interpretation of whatever you experience. And according to that, your emotion was aroused. So you become aware of that. And then you begin to become aware not only of the concept, you also begin to become aware of the perceptual process. So when you become aware of that whole process, you are aware of the whole reaction. So, to the extent that you become aware of this reaction, the reaction stops. That is how the reaction is stopped. And when the reaction is stopped, the mind is calm and tranquil. That tranquility of mind is what is called Samadhi, usually translated as concentration. It is not concentration, it is the stillness of the mind. It is incorrect to translate that as concentration. There is no concentration here. It is the stillness of the mind. And when you have fully understood this, that stillness can never be disturbed. That state where the stillness can never be disturbed is what is called nirvana or nibbana. Nir means non, vana means movement, non-movement is the stillness. I call it the imperturbability of mind. The mind can never be disturbed. So when that happens, you have understood Dhamma. That's the meaning of the Four Noble Truths. It's only when you have understood it fully that you have the harmonious perspective. So the ultimate goal of life becomes the tranquility or stillness of mind. Now Freud saw this to some extent. When he spoke of what he called the structural view. He spoke of three parts of the personality: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id was that emotional part, the ego was the rational part, and the superego refers to the conscience. And the conscience is simply built in childhood by the parents or whoever is looking after the child, giving the child an idea of what is good and bad, right and wrong. Now the child is not able to deal with this emotion and this conflict, and therefore there is this tendency to what is called repression, which is to forget about, try to forget. Repression is not the same thing as suppression. Repression is unconscious. Suppression can be conscious. So that this repression can lead to neurosis and even psychosis, mental sickness. That's what Freud saw. His aim was to somehow bring this out, what has been forgotten, to bring it out and deal with it. And he thought that the best way to deal with it is what he calls sublimation. because he saw that these emotions are instincts and therefore the emotion can never be removed, and we have to find some way of expressing the emotion, and he called it sublimation, which is to express the emotion in a socially acceptable way, to deal with it in a good way. But the Buddha pointed out that this emotion is not just something built into the system, it is coming from outside as a reaction, and therefore it can be removed completely, and the mind can be made calm and tranquil. The body can be relaxed. So instead of releasing tension in action, which is an unconscious process, when we release the tension in action, we are not conscious of the tension. We only want to get revenge on a person or to run away from a situation. We are not thinking of tension and release of tension. But the moment we become aware of the tension, we become aware of the excitement, and when we become aware of this, we can learn to consciously relax the tension instead of unconsciously releasing the tension. That's what Buddha saw. The conscious relaxation of tension, what today they talk about in stress management, relaxation techniques, learning to relax by becoming aware of tensions. So people are now gradually beginning to understand that it is possible to become aware of tensions and learn to relax the tension. And by learning to relax the tension is not enough. We also have to learn to control our thoughts. So it is controlling the thoughts that we call meditation. We have to learn to eliminate the emotional thoughts and cultivate calming thoughts. That's what I call selective thinking. We have to select the thoughts we think. That is how we begin to that is about guarding the senses and learning to change the pictures in the mind, the mental pictures. Because all emotions come with mental pictures. And if we hold on to those mental pictures, the emotion will continue. So if we want to get rid of an emotion, we have to get rid of the mental picture. So we can change our mental pictures, like changing channel on TVs. We can learn to change the mental pictures. Instead of just thinking about whatever thought comes into the mind, we can change our thinking. So learning to do that is what we call meditation. But most people, what they call meditation is concentrating. I think that's the wrong kind of meditation. Meditation is not concentration. Meditation is learning to relax the body and calm the mind. By changing mental pictures. That's the important thing. That's why thinking of the picture of the Buddha is a good meditation. If we learn to hold the picture of the Buddha in the mind, not just looking at a statue and concentrating on the statue, it's simply the idea of the Buddha as a calm, tranquil person, one who is very kind and compassionate. We have to picture the Buddha in that way. Now Christians do a similar thing when they meditate on Christ, I suppose. They talk about thinking of the heart of Christ. That's also good meditation. The important thing is not whether it is Christ or Buddha. The important thing is whether you are picturing a person who is kind, compassionate, calm, tranquil, or whether you are picturing a person who is agitated, rough, angry. So the moment you picture a person who is calm, tranquil, that's the important thing. So Buddhists think of the Buddha. So when we talk about the Noble Eightfold Path, which I translate as the supernormal Eightfold Way, I don't call it noble. It's not just being noble, it's being supernormal. You are going beyond the normal. It is normal to be angry. It's normal to be frightened. It is normal to have desires, passions, lust. There is nothing abnormal about it. So we are trying to go beyond the normal. And it is this happiness that we are talking about is a supernormal state. And because it is supernormal, some people call it divine. So the idea of divinity is actually the idea of supernormality. Divinity doesn't mean that it is coming from the Creator or the gods in heaven. It is simply a state that the human being could achieve. It is a supernormal state. The human being himself could reach that highest state of perfection which we see as the Buddha. The Buddha achieved this and taught us how to do it so that we could also achieve that state. So it is not the private property of the Buddha or the Creator of the world. It is common and available and accessible to every human being. It is the human potential that can be actualized So we start with this harmonious perspective in understanding the problem and its solution, and then the second step is what is called the goal orientation. That means we change our direction in life. Our normal direction in life is mainly based on our emotions. But when we have understood the problem and its solution, our goal is directed by our reasoning, not by the emotion. Because even the emotion is actually trying to arrive at tranquility of mind. That's the important thing to understand. Tranquility of mind is the goal. So when the goal becomes the tranquility of mind, then our speech becomes calm, courteous, and our actions become calm and courteous. Then our effort is mainly to calm the mind instead of trying to satisfy our desires. Tranquility being the goal, our effort is to calm the mind. And that leads to the introversion of attention. Our focus is mainly the mind. So we are always thinking, what am I thinking? What am I speaking? What am I doing? Always inwards. And we become aware of the body. We become aware of the sensations in the body. We become aware of the emotions. We become aware of the thoughts that we think. And as we do that, our mind becomes more and more calm and tranquil. And that's the meaning of Samadhi. And when our mind is calm and tranquil, we begin to understand the whole story fully. And that becomes the enlightenment and the awakening process. Awakening from the dream of existence. The idea of self completely disappears. Because when the mind is fully calm and tranquil, the idea of self disappears because you stop becoming aware of a self. When the mind is fully tranquil, you don't feel that there is a self. All the self that you begin to experience is mainly dependent on the tensions in the body. When the body is relaxed fully, you don't feel the self. And when you begin to understand that there is no self, when you think in terms of the impermanence of everything and how the unhappiness comes due to clinging to impermanent things, and when we begin to understand that we do not really own or possess anything in the world, even our own bodies we don't possess. Even the body is not mine or myself. So our feelings, thoughts are also not mine, myself. When we begin to see that, that idea of self completely disappears. When this idea of self disappears, we become free of all unhappiness. And the mind cannot be disturbed anymore. That is the meaning of Nibbana or Nirvana. So this in short is the way out of samsara and the attainment of Nibbana. So now you could ask questions if you want, and we can discuss further anything that you want. When you ask questions, I can explain things further and you'll be able to understand more clearly certain things that is not very clear to you. Yeah? There's someone there.
By awareing of hunger. If a man is hungry and if he awares of his hunger, in fact he cannot aware when he's hungry, he doesn't know that he's hungry, he knows it only after the thing has passed. So is it possible to start hunger by just awareing of his hunger?
Are you talking about anger?
Yes, sir.
You are asking whether it is possible to stop anger by becoming aware of anger.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sit, I will explain. Yes, it is possible to become aware of anger and stop anger by simply becoming aware of anger. But there is a problem here. The problem is, if you have a hot plate and you switch it off, will the heat disappear at once? It won't. It takes time for the heat to disappear. In a similar way, when there is anger, it's not only just a thought. Anger is a complete physical change taken place, where a hormone called adrenaline has got into the blood, and this has gone to various parts of the body, and various parts of the body has stopped, some parts have become overactive, some parts of the body has become underactive, and a big change has taken place in the body. It's a physical change, not just a mental change. So, when I become aware of the anger, and if we keep on watching the anger, it gradually subsides, like the hot plate gradually losing the heat. But if you become impatient, again you become angry, and then adrenaline flows in again. So the important thing is, watch the anger and be patient and wait. Then it disappears. That's how it has to be done. Another way is to get rid of the adrenaline by doing some kind of exercise. You can run or do some kind of play games or do some kind of exercise where the adrenaline will be excreted, sent out of the body quickly. That's the important thing there. And also the other thing is, the anger will remain only as long as you hold on to that picture, mental picture. So you have to take the mind out of the mental picture and observe the anger itself. If you keep holding on to that mental picture, this person did something to me and abused me or insulted me or whatever you are thinking, if you keep on holding that image, mental image, then your anger will not come to an end. That's the way to get rid of anger. Did you understand?
Yes, sir. I have one more question.
Yeah.
What is the main purpose of meditation?
What's that?
What is the main purpose? Why do we meditate? The main purpose.
Yeah. The why we meditate is to purify and calm the mind. That is the purpose of meditation. Okay?
You mentioned divinity. What do you mean by that? When you say we elicit divinity within us, what does that mean?
I didn't hear that word properly.
Divinity. What do you mean by divinity?
Divinity. I see. Well, divinity is a word used in religion. Divinity is used to refer to God and His attributes or qualities. And of course, some people think God simply means the creator of the world. But according to the Buddhist way of thinking, the creator of the world cannot be divine at all, because he has created suffering. So, the only divinity that we can recognize in Buddhism is goodness. And I think this is what all religions are really talking about when they talk about God. God is always seen as one who is good, not one who is bad. We don't think of a bad God. If it is bad, then he should be the devil, not God. So divinity is goodness really. And when we talk about the devil, we are talking about evil. So good and evil is what we are really referring to in the form of God and the devil. So divinity is simply the goodness. And this goodness of the human being is a supernormal state, because the normal human being is a mixture of both good and bad. So to be divine is to be completely pure in mind, and the purity of mind becomes the divinity. And this is why I think even Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." So if you purify your mind, then you will see God within you, not outside. That's the divinity. That's how I understand the word divinity. Okay.
When you were discussing the concept or the practices of sati dhamma, you mentioned 4 foundations of, you didn't want to call it mindfulness, but awareness.
Yeah.
If you could explain further the practice of those 4 observances as you meditate and attempt to still the mind and achieve concentration.
Well, one thing is, I am not saying that you have to achieve concentration. I said Samadhi is not concentration. Samadhi is the tranquility of mind. What we are trying to achieve is not concentration. What we are trying to achieve is tranquility of mind. And the other thing is, I don't think it is correct to get into the practice of Satipatthana, which is what is called mindfulness. That's not the beginning. The beginning is, the whole practice has to be the practice of what is called the Noble Eightfold Path, which I call the Supernormal Eightfold Way. Now the important thing is, you start with the harmonious perspective or right understanding. That right understanding is the understanding the problem and its solution. Without getting an intellectual understanding of that, your practice won't be very successful. And once you have done that, then comes your goal orientation. You have to change your goal in life. That is what is called Samma Sankappa. Sankappa, usually translated as right goal or right thought or right aspiration or something like that. But I translate it as the right orientation or harmonious orientation. And then comes the harmonious speech, the harmonious action, which is your changing of the behavior. The behavior changes only when the goal has been changed. That's very important. Now some modern psychologists have been talking about the importance of the goal orientation. And it's according to your goal that you begin to behave. So your behavior depends on your goal of life. And that leads to the harmonious practice, which is usually translated as right effort. That harmonious practice has to be done before the sati or mindfulness. I don't call it mindfulness, I call it the introversion of attention. But before you can introvert attention, you have to take your attention away from the external object to which you are reacting. So this is why the harmonious practice has 4 parts. One part, the first part is to guard the senses. The second part is to remove the unwholesome thoughts from the mind, which is to remove the image, the mental image, to change the mental image. And the third part is to focus your attention within. And the fourth part is to maintain the attention within. That's the main thing. And it is by this maintenance of the attention within that leads to what is normally called mindfulness, but what I call the introversion of attention. So focusing the attention within is the important thing there. And when you begin to focus your attention within, the first thing that you become aware of is the physical behavior part of it. How you react physically to what you see or hear or smell, taste, touch. So you have to first gain control over your behavior. That is the body. So you become aware of the body is to become aware of how the reaction takes place in the body. And to become aware, then next is to become aware of your sensations, how you feel in the body. The feeling is actually, you are becoming aware of the tensions in the body, which ultimately leads to the action. So once your action has been controlled, then the next step is to become aware of tensions, which are earliest act. And the tension is seen in the form of comfort or discomfort in the body. becoming aware of the comfort or the discomfort. And once you are aware of that, the next stage is to become aware of the emotional, the subtle emotional excitements. So with the tension comes the emotional excitement. So when you are able to become aware of the emotional, gradual, subtle emotional excitement, then you are also you are aware of the thoughts or the concepts or how you interpret situations. So that is the Dhammanupassana, the fourth one. Usually translated as becoming aware of mental objects or something like that. It's a very bad translation. It's not mental objects, it's simply the concepts. I hope I explained it. Huh? Yeah?
Hello, Bhante. My question relates somewhat to what I was asking last week and also to what you were just talking about. Because this is the one area where I have trouble meditating. I understand everything that you're saying about becoming aware of reactions in response to external stimuli. For me, it's when I close my eyes and go into meditation and I'm not responding to external stimuli, it's exactly those internal cognitive representations that you're just talking about that are in many ways I experience as real as reactions to external stimuli. And I think in some way even more real to me. I mean, by real I mean as real as, not necessarily real, but real to me because they're based on experiences from the past and exactly cognitive representations that I carry about in the world that exist inside, quote, my mind, and which themselves are attached to not only an immediate reaction, but reactions that I've had over and over and over again going back to the past. And I think when you talk about psychotherapy, this is something which psychoanalysts, psychologists, this is exactly one of the things that they struggle with, is sort of removing these ingrained mental patterns or conceptual habits of dealing with the world, so to speak. So part of what I'm wondering is when you talk about changing the mental picture, and again, I'm not talking about things that come up in response to external stimuli, but things that sort of somewhat have taken on a life of their own within the mind. Instead of changing, when you change that mental picture, how can you be sure that you're in fact truly changing the mental picture and not just repressing the emotion once again? In other words, what's the difference between true change of the mental picture and repression of the emotion? Is that clear?
Yeah. It's very clear to me.
Thank you.
Well, the important thing is to understand, if you use the two words, perceptual image and memory image, you begin to distinguish. So, a perceptual image is where we begin to see or hear or smell or taste or touch, and through that experience you derive a mental image. That's a perceptual image. A memory image is what you just spoke of. When you just sit in meditation, these memories come into your mind. So, what I was talking about is change that memory image, which means you have to take your attention away from that memory image. Now, in psychoanalysis, you might think that is wrong, but that's not wrong from this Buddhist way of thinking, because it is not repression. Repression is an unconscious process. Here you are conscious of it. So conscious eliminating the image is not repression. Repression is an unconscious process. So if you become aware of that, then it is possible to change your image. So those images are the things that begin to influence your actions and behavior. So it is that image that you have to get rid of. That is how Freud saw it also. So that the importance in psychoanalysis is also to bring those images into consciousness, where you can deal with it in a conscious way instead of in an unconscious way. So dealing with it in an unconscious way is what is called repression. So when it is conscious, it is not repression. So to change your image is a conscious process. So that is what has to be done, to throw that image out and focus on the good image, which may be just breathing or maybe just becoming aware of the body and the tensions. They are also images. So the image of calmness, tranquility, that's the important thing there. Did you understand?
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. And one of the things that I really like about Buddhism is its practicality, because you can immediately go use these things and try them for yourself, and they usually work. So thank you. I have a simple question.
Yeah.
Do you think, well, you talk about how emotions are related to neurotransmitters and hormones within the body, which science also agrees.
Yeah.
Do you think that when we change our levels of tranquility, we can actually change how the body physically produces these neurotransmitters, like permanently?
Oh yes, that's what it means. That when the mind is calm and the body is relaxed, tranquil, all those things begin to change. Even the brain, the messages going in the brain begins to take new paths and stop going on the paths that messages have been going earlier. So this is the main thing in meditation. So when we begin to think good thoughts, the messages begin to go on different new paths, and they get well established. That's how it is.
Thank you. I have a question. In those brief moments when I felt the tranquility and the calmness and not attached, I tend to have a moment of realizing the pleasure of that, and also wanting to grasp it towards me, and it immediately disappears. I just wanted to know if you understand what I guess I'm asking, do you have
No, that's okay.
suggestions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
The important thing is that the tranquility of mind will give you a feeling of happiness. But if you begin to cling to that, the desire for happiness comes up as an emotion. Again, the happiness disappears. Because the happiness comes due to the relaxation and the calm. The calmness is lost when you begin to become greedy for it. So you see, that's how it happens. So you have to remain relaxed and calm instead of trying to cling to things. That's the important thing. Yeah, you had
with regard to meditation, you were saying that one should try to introduce positive mental concepts when you have negative thoughts coming in. But isn't the practice of say vipassana about dealing with reality as it is, whatever that comes up, whether it's positive or negative, that you try to sit with it and develop equanimity. That's one part of the question, and the other is in Vipassana, shouldn't we try to focus on the sensations on the body and take the attention away from images in the mind, because by focusing attention on the sensations on the body, you're also able to get away from the various kinds of mental images that come up. And that if we look at the sensations with equanimity, then we can in fact develop that stillness.
Well, the thing is, the way you use the words can be a little confusing. The important thing is that what you have to be doing, if you think, is to stop reacting. The important thing is to stop reacting. And therefore, I said you have to guard your senses. Now, guarding the senses means you don't think about the pleasantness of what you see, or pleasantness of what you hear or smell, taste, touch, and even think about memories that come into mind. You don't think about the unpleasantness, and that is how you begin to stop reacting, and you guard your senses. So it is by guarding the senses that way that you begin to acquire the calm state, the tranquility of mind. If you think I am just aware of whatever comes into the mind, that is not going to help. Just being aware of whatever comes into the mind is not the thing to be done. To be aware of is not the main thing. This is why this idea of mindfulness becomes bad. We are not trying to be mindful. We are trying to focus our attention within, which is the reaction to an object rather than the object itself. But before we can do that, we have to learn to take our attention away from the object. If we don't learn to take our attention away from the object, we can't focus it on the reaction to the object. So most people who sometimes teach meditation and practice meditation, they go in the wrong way, because they are caught up with words like mindfulness and concentration. This is the problem. The moment we are caught up with those words, we go in the wrong way. Because somehow some Englishmen who began to translate these words into English, these Pali words into English, used the wrong words to translate. And then the other people begin to just blindly follow that and use the same words. They have been continuing to use those words. And as a result, those who begin to seriously practice are misled. This is why I have started using different words to translate this, so that the meaning becomes different. Did you understand that? Or you can say whatever you have to say till it becomes clear to you.
Because of my own training in the focus, especially in the Goenka tradition, the focus is, not on replacing mental images, but on focusing on the sensations. But, I don't want to go there, but my other question is the final objective stillness or developing compassion?
What's that?
Developing compassion. I mean, it's almost, it's not just stillness for itself, but it is the compassion to overcome the duality of self versus other. And so that's why, after meditation practice, it's often, the metta bhavana is often done as a way of, using that benefit of that stillness to develop that compassion towards all. And my other question is compassion itself an emotion? Isn't it an emotion?
That's the problem. Well, I will explain that. You see, compassion is not an emotion. This is the important thing to understand. All emotions are self-centered. This is the main thing to understand. All emotional excitements are self-centered. So this is why it is very important to get rid of these emotions. And we cannot get rid of the emotions by fighting with them, or trying to suppress them, or by repressing them. The only way to get rid of the emotion is to learn that an emotion is an agitation of the mind, an excitement. So what we need is calmness of mind. It's only when the mind is calm and free of emotion that we can become interested in others. So the real compassion comes not by practicing compassion meditation, but by practicing calmness of mind. When the mind is calm, compassion automatically comes. The calm mind is a compassionate mind, because it is not self-centered anymore. So when it is not self-centered, then you can become interested in the welfare of another person, not for your sake, but for that person's sake. So the real compassion results from tranquility of mind. Tranquility is not something outside compassion. Compassion is not another emotion. That's the important thing to understand.
Bhante, I want to understand how one begins the process. And you said the beginning is we understand the problem and the solution rather than sati. That's not the beginning, as I understand what you say.
Yeah.
So what is the understanding of the beginning? And my question is it an understanding of the Four Noble Truths? Is that the understanding of the problem and the solution?
Yeah. Understanding the Four Noble Truths is the main thing. That's it, the problem and its solution. But it has to be understood properly. Simply reading the book and saying, oh, now I know, is not enough. You have to understand it fully so that you can see how that applies to your own problems. So the Dhamma is like a light. When you are in the dark, you switch on the light, you can see what is around you. So in a similar way, the Four Noble Truths is like a light that shows what is happening to you, what is your problem. So you have to understand your problem in the light of the Four Noble Truths. That's the important thing. And then you begin to see the cause of the problem and its solution. You have to see that the problem is created by your emotion, your blind emotion that is seeking unreality. So it's just trying to seek a goal that is unreal. So you have to seek a realistic goal, and that is to be guided not by your emotion but by your reason, your thinking. That's how it works.
So is a realistic goal then taking the attention away from what you were saying earlier? We have to take our attention away from the object that is creating emotions for us. Now, my question is...
You can't say the object is creating the emotion. You are reacting
Yes,
to the object.
stimuli, yes.
Yeah.
How would you say one would do that? How would we take, what would be the first step I could take in practice now, in developing the skill of successfully taking my attention away from that reaction? Well, how do I do that?
Now, first thing is to understand your problem fully, and the understanding leads to a goal orientation, and the goal orientation is calmness, tranquility of mind, which is the same thing as stopping the reaction to the stimulus. So you have to think of yourself as an organism in an environment, and the environment is stimulating the organism, and the organism is reacting. Don't think in terms of a self here. You think of yourself as an organism in an environment. So this organism is reacting. So the reaction, as you observe at the beginning, is in the form of behavior, in the form of actions, not even in the form of thoughts. You are seeing the reaction as physical behavior, as your speech and as your actions. So when someone says something, you begin to answer in the form of speech. Or when you observe something, you might even come out with a verbal expression. This is happening here. Or you might take action as a physical action. You might run, or you might fight, or you might do all kinds of things. That is your action. So that action you have to observe and stop the action. As you observe that action, you can stop it. When you observe your speech, you can stop it. So the main thing is to observe what is happening and stop it. That is where you start with the first part of the Noble Eightfold Path, which is your perspective, which is your understanding of the problem and its solution. Then the second step is the goal orientation, which is calmness, tranquility. And the third step is the right speech. The fourth step is the right action. And the fifth step, usually translated as right livelihood, I think is not the right translation. It's right living, which is the right lifestyle. What modern psychologists like really Adler use that word lifestyle. And so lifestyle is simply how you are living, which is in terms of your goal in life. What is your goal in life, which was already determined at the second step. So, in other words, you are living a calm life. And then, once you have done that, Then the next step is the harmonious practice, what is called right effort, which is to take your attention away from the objects. What you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch. You take your attention away from those things. That's the main thing. And then you deal with the memories that come into your mind. That is the memory image you are dealing with. Earlier you were dealing with the perceptual image, which is whenever you hear music, you don't think about it. You don't focus on it. When you see something beautiful, you don't focus on that. When you get a good smell, you don't focus on that. When you get a good taste, you don't focus on that. When you get a good feeling in the body, you don't focus on that. So that was the perceptual image. And then you are now dealing with the memory image, the second step, which is whenever memories come into your mind, when you are thinking of something that happened in the past, you don't focus on that again. Take your mind away from that. And then your mind is now mainly on the reaction. You are mainly focusing on the reaction rather than the object to which you are reacting. And that is how you get into what is called sati, not mindfulness, but introversion of attention. You focus your attention on how your body becomes tensed and there is an urge to act, but you don't act now. You just relax. And then you become aware of the emotions, subtle emotions that come up, and you don't get excited. As you observe it, relax and calm your mind. And then you begin to observe the thoughts that come into your mind, how you interpret situations. So you become aware of your interpretation of your situations, whatever situation that arises. And calm the mind again. And you keep on doing that. And that is how you gradually enter Samadhi. Samadhi is not a hypnotic state. Samadhi is not a trance. It is a state of relaxation and calmness of mind. Tranquility of mind. It is not concentration. It is simply tranquility of mind. You don't have to be sitting all the time to be in Samadhi. You can be in Samadhi standing while walking or lying down. So Samadhi is not a hypnotic trance. It's very important to understand that. But those who begin to practice concentration enter the hypnotic state because that is the way to hypnotize. That is the Braid's method of hypnosis. Braid was the person who coined the word hypnosis. He was the person who discovered hypnosis. So his method of hypnosis was to get a person to concentrate on an object. So if people begin to call that meditation, then meditation becomes hypnosis. So the important thing is not concentration, no. It's relaxation and calm. That is what meditation is. And purifying the mind of emotional thoughts, freeing the mind of emotional images that produce emotional excitement. That's the main thing. Yeah.
So is how I begin then. Is how I begin then is to cultivate and perfect samadhi, calming.
Yeah.
That's
right.
The beginning of all this work that lies ahead.
Samadhi.
Each one.
It is only when the mind is calm that you can get insight. Some people talk about getting insight without samadhi. That is not true. You cannot get insight without the mind being calm. The mind has to be calm before it can become aware of the realities. Otherwise, you can get an intellectual view about reality, but it is simply an intellectual concept. It is not the real insight. It's not the real understanding. Any other thoughts? No more questions, huh? Well, if you have no more questions, we'll bring this to an end. And so, I will chant a blessing to bring you good health and happiness and progress on your path. Bring your hands, palms together and listen with devotion. Bhavatu sabba mangalam rakkantu sabba devata sabba buddhanubhavena sada sutti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalam rakkantu sabba devata sabba dhammanubhavena sada sutti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalam rakkantu sabba devata sabba sanghanubhavena sada sutti bhavantu te. May you all be well, comfortable. May you be able to attain the highest peace of the Sadhu.